Thank you for joining us at 4D Meets AI, and welcome to the Investing in New Digital Health AI Applications panel, hosted by Life Science Nation and moderated by Jumpstart Health Investors founder and CEO, Vic Gatto. After the panel, you can connect directly with participants via our premier partnering platform. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Thanks, Roy. Excited to be here. It's going to be a fast-paced and fun panel. So we're going to talk about AI and investing in digital health in the AI world. And I think with the strength of the panel, we all have done panels for a long time in many sessions. So we decided to throw a curveball to ourselves just to sort of keep it interesting. We all are still trying to deal with the COVID-19 epidemic and realizing that our life has changed, dramatically in lots of ways, large and small. And, over the last 6 to 9 months, we've come to realize just how foundational health is to our society, right? Like, we don't have school, we don't have government, we don't have voting, we don't have anything, we don't have restaurants if we don't have public health and solid health systems. And so that really is sort of at the foundation of our society. Kind of scary for me personally to realize how fragile we all are. I mean, at Christmas time last year, I thought, we were subject to very few things that could knock over our entire way of life. And then all of a sudden realized quickly how fast that can change. And yet at the same time, I've personally witnessed lots of, I'll call them acts of kindness, with people jumping in and helping out in lots of ways that really kind of, in general, we're all in this fight against the pandemic together. And so we thought that we would sort of take that as a starting point for our panel and sort of talk about the impact of COVID on our society, on our life, and then what does that mean to us as far as digital health. So I've asked the panel to think about that in prep. I'm sure we will all come at it from different points of view. That's kind of the point of the panel. And it's, it's the first time we've experimented with this kind of panel, so we'll see how it goes. It could be a fireball. It could be beautiful. I'm not exactly sure. But to start off, let's just do some quick introductions. And so I'm just going to go around quickly. Lu Zhang, maybe you could start off, and then we'll kind of go around the horn here. Just give a quick 1-minute intro of yourself and your fund and your perspective.
Sounds good. Thank you. Hi, everyone. This is Lu. I'm the founder and the managing partner of Fusion Fund. We're a Silicon Valley-based venture capital firm focused on early-stage investment of industry tech, enterprise tech, and healthcare tech. So far, we already have a portfolio of over 52 portfolio companies across the United States, and also invest across early and growth and even later stage. And my personal experience started as an entrepreneur. I was born and raised in Inner Mongolia and came to United States 10 years ago as a material science researcher at Stanford. And I later started a medical device company when I was 21 with a focus of type 2 diabetes early stage diagnostic, which also opened up my kind of experience in healthcare industry. After I sold my company to Boston Scientific, I started to do investment with my own capital, joined a VC firm as a partner, and eventually in 2015, 5 years ago, launched Fusion Fund. So we've been investing since then.
Great, thank you. Maybe Sarah, go next.
Sure, happy to, and glad to be here. So I'm Sarah, I'm a partner at Wing VC. We're an early stage B2B firm. We just raised our $450 million fund recently, entirely virtual through COVID. So if there are any founders out there, I empathize. It's not easy, but very happy to support the founders we work with at the seed, power seed, and Series A stages. In particular, I lead our digital life sciences and digital health practice. And in my prior life, I was actually a founder myself. Was able to sell my last company to a public entity before joining Wing on the investing side. Very happy to be here.
Great, excellent. Desney, maybe give your perspective.
Sure, thanks, Vic. So I'm formally trained as a technologist with my PhD in computer science. started off in the aerospace industry, working on autonomous navigation in the early 90s. Served a couple of years in the military and then came out of that being done with government work. And so went all the way full board into entertainment technology on the other end, where I worked with Disney and launched their theme parks, virtual reality theme parks, Disney Quest in the early 2000s. I've been at Microsoft for the last 15 years or so, largely creating and evolving our innovation pipeline here, and taking various hardware and software technologies from idea to proof of concept to validation and eventually to market and scale. Currently run research and incubation for Microsoft Health and Life Sciences. But as part of my broader activities, I also hold a faculty appointment at the University of Washington, and am an active angel investor around the Seattle region, and serve as chief technologist for Seattle-based life science consultancy and incubator, IntuitiveX. In short, I get to play visionary entrepreneur, engineer, scientist, corporate executive, investor, advisor, like many of my fellow panelists here, which is just a blast. So thanks for having me here.
Great, excellent. And last, Miraj, give your background.
Yeah, thanks, Vic. Miraj here. I'm a principal at Digitex Partners. So Digitex Partners, we're an early stage venture capital firm, similar to a lot of people on the panel. For us, we're exclusively focused on digital health. And so at the end of 2018, we raised our second fund, which is a $75 million fund that we're using to invest in the space. And so for us, typically, I would say 80% of our investments are going to be the Series A stage. We're writing a $2 to $4 million check. We'll do some seed and some Series B investments. And when I say digital health, we take a broad view, which I'm sure we'll go into a little bit more, but basically anything that really touches the patient in any way, either device, non-invasive device, or software tools. My background, before hopping over to the venture space, I was a healthcare policy consultant, so working at a private company, but working directly with Medicare on their Part D side, which is their prescription drug data. So really helping the government understand how the program is being provided and how beneficiaries are being taken care of. From there, I hopped over to the startup space and was a data scientist at a few startup companies. And then about 4 years ago, hopped over onto the venture side.
Great, excellent. And again, I'm Vic Gatta with Jumpstart. We are a growth investor specializing in health only, pre-seed to A, and have 102 assets in the portfolio. I think the commonality of everyone across the board is we all have sort of gotten our hands dirty. We all have been in various operating roles, large and small companies with decent success, and then have switched over and feel like we can have a bigger impact, broader impact through our investing practices. And so, Miraj, let me jump in with you. Give me, how you see COVID. What's your impression of COVID broadly, and then let's dig into the regulatory changes that may come out of it. What do you see out in the landscape?
Yeah, thanks, Vic. So, broadly, COVID, I think at this point now, really the world has been, well, I guess the US has really been, handling it for the past 6, maybe 7 months or so, maybe up to 10 months. But I think for the most part, most people have kind of understood, especially even this program was probably supposed to be live, and now we're doing it all virtual. And so to some degree, I think we've started to understand. I think the big change that I'm sure we're going to dig into more is how healthcare has really become front and center for a lot of people on not only just healthcare in general, because COVID is obviously a healthcare emergency, but a healthcare pandemic, but it's more about access to that care. And partly, as I was thinking about this, and how you brought this up, there is obviously regulation and policy that does affect how healthcare is provided, because healthcare is a unique thing in that it's obviously a business, but it's a strange type of business that doesn't have a pure market play that most other businesses kind of operate under. And so I think initially we saw telemedicine really take off, and partly that was because state licensure wasn't really an issue because the government came out and said that you don't have to worry about this as much. States were coming out and saying that you can provide telemedicine across state lines. And another big thing was that CMS and Medicare decided to reimburse physicians for the same amount. And so that really took the adoption of telemedicine. But what we're seeing now is that, that's kind of gone back to maybe 20% or so, I think was the latest data, from something like 80% or so of the visits. And so that's the way that I've at least been thinking about COVID is, there's a lot of changes that's coming up through policy and regulation that will make changes to allow for healthcare to be more available, but I think that it's not going to be the cure-all that's going to completely open it up. One thing that at least I've been thinking about that's coming up sometime next year, that's not even related to COVID, but it's really from the 21st Century Cures Act that's now taken almost 4 years to, one part of it that's taken 4 years to get pushed out, is the interoperability rules that's going to be coming out. And so that's how I kind of view, I mean, I think there's a couple of big policy changes that are going to be happening. And, you know, I'm sure there's many others, but for me, the things that I'm thinking about for at least 2021 is interoperability, price transparency, and even just most recently what's happening with FDA and CMS deciding that if it's a breakthrough device that they're going to start reimbursing it right away, or CMS will be. And so all of those are coming in the future. I think that my view is that COVID's going to help push those things forward. I don't think that, you know, as is evident by interoperability, it's going to take some time for for regulation to really catch up, or maybe make it more open for startup companies to take advantage of it. And yeah, it'd be helpful to hear, I guess, how other panels are thinking about it. I think that COVID's definitely pushing things forward, and I think it honestly is an exciting time to be in the digital health space and where I sit, because I think that a lot more Americans are, and people around the world are thinking about healthcare and how to interact with healthcare in a digital way. And I think that also providers are a lot more forward in accepting that as a modality.
So are there other panelists that would chime in around interoperability or price transparency and what y'all see out there? No.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, sorry, go ahead, Vic.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, I'm excited for both. I mean, I think healthcare has been really stymied from bringing innovation to market, allowing entrepreneurs and founders to make healthcare better for consumers and better for providers and better for everyone, because of regulation that I think needs to come down. It certainly there's value in protecting people and protecting safety, but I think in other fields like public safety and defense and banking and fintech, we have balanced that, and it's time to start balancing that in healthcare. So, Des, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the sentiment that, you know, I think the visibility and urgency that COVID has imposed on us has really exaggerated and accelerated a lot of I think what many of us would have seen as being fairly natural movements in a perhaps somewhat illogical market. The market at local scale is a pure market and is fairly logical. I think what's happened is that there is a set of drastically misaligned incentives to the point where the global incentives and motivation might actually end up might actually be somewhat perverse in many cases. And so what COVID really allows us to do is it gives us that wedge, if you will, as Miraj is sort of saying, into the digital technology transformation or digital health transformation. And you see this happening across, it's not just healthcare, but across all sectors, where innovators are taking advantage of the particular opportunity. I think regulators are being much more cognizant and a little bit more aggressive in the way they operate and experiment, if you will. It's probably worth pointing out as well that some of these experiments will fail, and some of these very quick actions will be mistakes in the long run. But we as entrepreneurs know, I think overall, so long as we don't massively break the system, those end up being useful experiments to run and useful learnings to have in an otherwise fairly stagnant system.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take. I mean, I think telemedicine is a good case study, right? Like, it was years with everyone on the call sort of lobbying or advocating that we should do more over telemedicine. And then due to patient safety in March and April, all of a sudden the regulators had to figure out a way to enable this and get reimbursement and get state licensure figured out. And that impetus for change, kind of the crisis, right, drove a bunch of red tape to be cut through and very quickly solved, maybe not perfectly, but pretty well. And I don't think we're going to go back. I mean, I think once you have the experience of seeing your provider virtually and not having to drive down, park, sit in the lobby, I personally don't want to go back. I don't think we're going to go back. And so that's just one example, but I think the whole regulatory infrastructure needs to be thought through.
Yeah, and I want to quickly chime here regarding specific FDA. I think, you know, on one side, I totally agree that this pandemic definitely pushed the digital transformation, which also get pressure and motivation for FDA to act faster. But actually, the change is not only because of the pandemic. For the past couple of years, FDA is getting better and better. From personal experience, when I was an entrepreneur myself, I have to admit my experience with FDA approval was not pleasant. But for the past couple of years, especially since Scott was the head of FDA, he was a former venture partner at NEA. So he's kind of a bridge between the venture technology and the regulator, and he put the right people into place. Even he left, and now still the good people within the FDA was able to really quickly adapt to the new trend, which is how to better support bringing the new technology to the traditional healthcare system. So at least from our experience, we have been seeing much faster FDA approval for the AI in healthcare company for the past 2 years. Most of the company got FDA 510K approval within half a year. So I think that's a systematical change happened for the past year, which is really beneficial for the founder. But on the other side, I think it's very critical for founder to realize that knowing that FDA is changing, it's getting better, it's not only one-time thing only for the pandemic. So for them, it's really change the mindset to how to better engage with regulator and FDA rather than treat them as a challenge or enemy, but treat FDA as your friends. If you engage with them and also help educate them about how to better understand and leverage new technology within the healthcare application, they will also benefit from the faster, FDA regulation approval.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, patient safety is a real thing, right? It's someone's mom taking that drug, someone's mom that is interacting with a new digital health application. And so we as a society, I think we need the FDA to make sure that it is reasonably safe. But they have gotten much better at sort of processing through that quickly. So I agree with partnering with the regulators as long as they continue on their trajectory of getting more and more efficient. So Desney, let me turn to you. Maybe give your impression of COVID, and you're of course at Microsoft. I'm really interested in sort of how Microsoft thinks about remote and virtual in this COVID and then post-COVID world.
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting. I mean, at the high level, I'm pretty thankful it doesn't look like COVID's going to be the one that takes us all down. But you know, as we've already been discussing, it's a pretty decent shot across the bow. You know, I see pretty broad landscape changes. I think as everyone else does, there's everything from government reserves and preparedness, I think is going to increase quite a bit. I think there'll be a long, hard look when we're through this at the domestic manufacturing and supply chains. We've already talked about reconsideration of regulatory landscape and barriers, especially with respect to digital tools. We see very heavy debates about the boundaries of civil liberties and what we're willing to give to get. In the longer run, I think there's going to be a whole bunch of opportunities for innovators in all industries, but specifically in the healthcare space. We'll see things like AI and robotic augmentations for human labor and decision making. As you point out, we already see a whole bunch of shifts to work from home opportunities and the decentralization, I guess, of the workforce in many industries. My kids are sitting in the room next to me at school right now, so virtual education is now a real thing. Struggling for a number of years, but now getting figured out very quickly. Online retail, teleconferencing, telemedicine, you sort of see the virtual and the remote becoming prevalent. I don't know if I were to think through, and then I'll comment on your latter part of your question with respect to Microsoft's stance, but if I were to think through healthcare and think through the particular sectors within healthcare, I think the payers and providers are going to go through or are going through pretty massive change. It's always been a little bit strange to me that we bring all our sick people to common brick and mortar locations, where doctors get a very thin slice of observation and have to diagnose and treat in very short periods of time. Seems like a historical artifact. I think we now see new models emerging, especially as more and more of what we treat becomes chronic and infectious disease. Alongside with regulatory pressures, I think more and more of healthcare will get distributed into the real world, and hopefully digitized as a result. The downstream effects of this are pretty significant, or could be pretty significant, I guess. All the way through diagnostic, therapeutic discovery, validation, surveillance. I think all that will start to get distributed into the real world, and we will start to make a real run, in my estimation, towards our longstanding vision of precision medicine, or this notion of personalized, data-driven medicine. With respect to Microsoft, we've really taken a fairly aggressive stance with respect to being able to do our jobs remotely. And so, as a company, we've already stated that we won't be one of the first companies that tries to get people back into the offices. In fact, we're now really thinking hard about what the steady state in the long run would look like. Probably more important than that, we recognize that we're not the only company in this situation right now, and so a good chunk of the tools, the technology tools, and the technology future that we're plotting really takes into account the fact that workforces and various processes, within healthcare and more broadly, will become remote and virtual. And will require a bunch of support, process support, business support, technology support. I'll make one last point, which I guess was less obvious to me at the beginning and has become increasingly obvious, which is that as we digitize healthcare in the bulk of our industries, it's a common, I think, misconception that we provide access, that access and equity comes as a natural consequence of this. And in many cases, actually, I think what we see is a divergence and actually a reduced amount of access and equity, largely driven by the continuing prevalence of the digital divide. And so as we think about remote, as we think about new technologies, as we think about the evolution, I do think and assert that we have to be very thoughtful in architecting access and equity of these technologies and of these new processes across the board. Yeah. I don't know if others have thoughts.
There's a lot there. Sarah, let me bring you in. So comment on various pieces of that. What do you agree with? What do you think could be re-characterized, or we need to dig in more to?
Sure. Yeah, I think that there was a lot there that I completely agree with, especially that last point. When I talk to health system executives, I always ask them, hey, what are your top 3 things that you're thinking through, that you're prioritizing, that you're working on? I'd say number 1 would be this quote unquote digital transformation. And I'd say telemedicine actually ranks as number 1 in that. Number 2, interestingly enough, at least that I've observed, is digital triage and how to get to these various endpoints, such as telemedicine. But actually the third is exactly what you mentioned, which is access. It's mobilizing responses, understanding that in order to get communities to these digital touch points, if we believe this wave of digital transformation is upon us, which I personally do, how to make sure that this is a equal opportunity sort of a play, and that people who are honestly in most dire need of these services actually have access. So it's something I think that we think through from an investing perspective, because these buyers, these customers are thinking through it, and also just for our society. I mean, I think it's particularly important that we make sure people don't get left behind in this transformation that's happening underway. I'd like to note that the other thing I think that's interesting when I'm having these conversations is the question always comes up, look, all these changes are underway, it feels markedly different. If the rate of AI adoption, for example, within the health systems, was only increasing at a rate of about 2% per year per COVID, prior to COVID, and now it looks very different. Hey, is this actually going to last? Is this going to remain post-COVID, and is this the new normal, or are we just going to go back to how things were in the past? And the answer that I'm hearing resoundingly from the direct buyers of these digital tools is, look, the toothpaste is out of the tube. That's what I've been hearing. It's kind of an elegant metaphor where it does seem like these changes are here to stay. And so as a part of that, if we're thinking about this as the new normal, then yes, absolutely, access is so important. We don't want people to be left behind, but also we want these tools to be accessible. It's better for all the stakeholders in the ecosystem, for sure.
Yeah, so that I think those two things together are really interesting. Like health, that of course we're all in the middle of health. It is certainly it's a for-profit industry. We all make our living in it, and yet it's also a public good, right? And the society and honestly our government funds half of it, or maybe a little more than half of it, roughly half of it. And so the equity and the access needs to be considered maybe differently than the apparel industry or other industries that aren't exactly the same. And so that balance of trying to bring new solutions out that can really help with chronic disease or help with any of the significant issues that we face as a society, you have to balance that, like bringing it out to everyone, but also aligning incentives and designing a system that can be efficient. So that, to me, that tension is like the thing that as investors we have to be able to balance. If the goal is only to make returns for my investors, I still need to balance that so that it gets large scale adoption and sort of propagates out there. Do y'all agree with that, or is that too far?
No, I would agree with that. I mean, I think, we've said this a couple of times, the providers, these large providers are businesses at the end of the day, and they have, and what happened at the beginning of COVID, yes, they could bill for telemedicine, but the big ticket items, surgeries that brought in a lot of money to the hospitals, were not happening. And even one thing, my brother is a radiation oncologist, he was telling me something interesting. They had so many less cases, and partly that was people not coming into for routine checkups, so the cancer wasn't being caught. The other thing that he was saying, which was surprising to me, emergency room visits weren't happening as much, and that was a big area that they actually caught cancer at an early stage and would send them over to the radiation oncologist. And so I think that that's going to be kind of an area that's going to continue. But partly, to bring it back to what you're saying, because these providers are businesses, I think that as startup companies, it's going to be even more important to find how you're helping with the ROI, because I think that they've been pressured a lot with not having as much revenues this year for sure, and potentially next year, depending on how long COVID continues, that when they're thinking about a new tool, it really does need to more quickly show how they're going to have an ROI for that investment. It's not just going to be, I mean, this was already the case where you needed a physician champion to kind of push something through. I think you need that. And you need also to go all the way to the CFO to show how, as a business, this is going to actually help the patients, the provider be more efficient, and the hospital make more money. Because I think that even more so now, that's something that has to happen.
Yeah, I agree. So Lou, maybe take a step back and give me your perspective of COVID. What has been the impact? How do you think about that at Fusion Fund? What's your perspective?
Yeah, happy to share. I would say I totally agree with other panelists mentioned about this whole pandemic, the kind of accelerating the digital transformation for the whole healthcare industry, definitely for other traditional sector as well. It's just for the healthcare sector is more kind of a direct impact in terms of no matter from the workflow efficiency of the traditional pharmaceutical medical device company, or even the format of lots of new digital health application. And for us, we've been investing in healthcare since day one because my previous experience as a former healthcare background entrepreneur. And we also have a specific focus on diagnostic, especially cancer, heart disease, and mental disease diagnostic. And if we talk about diagnostic, no matter we talk about AI in healthcare, edge compute for healthcare, definitely support a lot of improvement of the diagnostic technology in general. I think for healthcare industry in general, especially for diagnostic sector, the major problem is always I call it a triple A problem: accessibility, affordable, and accuracy. And all three problems could be resolved by new technology adoption, especially digital transformation powered by AI edge compute very well. For example, for accessibility, we already have several examples, no matter telemedicine or even just a simple organization transformation within the healthcare provider system would give a much better accessibility to patient in general. And even I saw some company, including our portfolio company, they provide AI solution for the traditional pharma company to help them build up the new type of infrastructure, support their own employees' accessibility to work remotely. And then the second one is affordable. It also could be supported by lots of AI in healthcare solution for diagnostic. For example, for COVID-19, I will agree if we could do the diagnostic better earlier, or even make it not just a one-time diagnostic, but make it possible to have a continuous monitoring of the progression of the disease and also the situation, spread out situation, we'll have much better control no matter over COVID-19 or other disease. So there's some company, for example, providing just a software-enabled solution to make a high-resolution scan of a CT scan, PET scan, without changing the hardware portion, which definitely give much better price and lower cost of all these diagnostic services to all the patient. And the last one is the accuracy. If we talk about accuracy for diagnostic, it's not only for COVID-19, for other, for example, I mentioned mental health and also the cancer. For example, for mental health, for a long time, we don't have enough data point to find a correlation between what actually trigger mental disease for a certain group of people. But now with AI in healthcare and digital solution, we're able to find a correlation very well. And meanwhile, this is also another format of providing better accessibility for patients. For example, for the past couple of months, I heard my friends from Stanford, like Stanford University, other universities, they were worried about the students' mental well-being. And for large corporate, they have that concern as well. And now they have all this digital solution to provide mental services, mental consulting, mental well-being services, consulting service online to their employee to help better, maintain their situation while they're working from home. So this is all the solution powered by the new technology. And for cancer specifically, because that's the field I really have a strong passion for investing. For a long time, diagnostic for cancer in general, no matter device or software hardware integration solution, was not an area really attract tons of the capital. But now with AI in healthcare, especially digital solution, we're really could able to do personalized diagnostic result, which gonna further empower the target medicine and also personalize the treatment plan for certain cancer, which is a bright future. And meanwhile, for the company itself, some VC worry about the exit might not be big enough. Maybe for the vertical focus, the medical devices, that's the case. But now if the traditional medical device for cancer diagnostic could really integrate with a layer of the software, deep learning analysis, really leverage the bioinformatics analysis result, they were able to change the vertical play to a platform play, then the ultimate potential exit size will be much bigger. So for us, definitely pandemic's a really big challenge for the whole society, but for the healthcare industry, especially for diagnostic industry in general, we see great opportunity came out. And on the other side, we also see great progress from the other player. One important player in the healthcare system in general is an insurance company. They've been quite active engaging with lots of the new solution for diagnostic. And I think for the past 1 year, they were even more aggressive, try to be the direct, buyer and also adopter of the new diagnostic solution. Then they could directly buy the solution, put in the order, and leverage their distribution channel to provide this early, no matter monitoring or diagnostic solution to their patient, which also help the founder to find a better business plan and the business model. So we see great opportunity, and would love to also promote and welcome more investors to allocate more capital for the diagnostic focused area.
Yeah, I agree. I think diagnostics, if we can catch any disease state, but certainly cancer early, the outcomes are much better and the cost is much lower. So there's no question that's really important. One of the things I want to bring in the rest of the panel for is that as we get wearables and all kinds of new data sources, there's massive amounts of data on my health, on everyone's health. And it strikes me that AI may be the best tool to begin to aggregate that data and find insights out of it, where otherwise it would just be overwhelming and humans wouldn't be able to do it. Do any of you have experience with that or interest in that area?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we get super excited about, and what I personally find a lot of opportunity in. It's this intersection of, let's call it, data and health, which can mean a couple of different things, but I think overarching is the theme that entrepreneurs now have the opportunity to take advantage of the great proliferation of data that's happening all over the healthcare ecosystem. It's absolutely present in diagnostics. I could not agree with you more, Lou. It also happens all the way along the spectrum to the very basics of understanding biology. Our bodies are incredibly complex. And I think that we're only starting to unlock and understand little parts of our biology. Certainly we have a long way to go, but without ML in particular, I don't know that we could get further in unlocking the great secrets and mysteries of our bodies. And so particularly in what I would call the digital life sciences, this intersection of ML and biology, ML and health, however you want to coin it, is particularly an exciting opportunity for us to look at as investors, but also for entrepreneurs to be able to take advantage of more and more tools and resources as they're building their businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I really think, especially for the ongoing diagnostics, where every day, every week, there's data being aggregated. I've been using the analogy of a check engine light, I kind of want a check engine light for my health, right? Like the check engine light doesn't work if it pops up after my car's already broken down. It needs to pop up a little bit ahead. And without machine learning and AI, there's just so much complexity that I think we're not gonna be able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think that you're seeing a lot of the providers, initially they might not have wanted to use those wearable devices because they didn't trust the data that was coming from it. But I think that now it's been long enough, and enough of these companies have gone through the FDA process to prove that we have really good repeatable data, that when we're flagging it initially, it's a lot of it's AFib. So when we're flagging an AFib, there maybe just go and take a look at it further as a provider, but there's something there that you should look at. And so I think that that's definitely helping, and just the proliferation of all these devices, and also just they're getting a lot better at what they're actually reporting, so that providers are getting more comfortable with it. And totally agree with you that the only way to parse through all that data is with AI. And I mean, that's where it really shines, is large amounts of data, and then this is the outcome that happened. Predict what early indicators would have led me to know that a heart attack was going to happen now that you have all this data. And so it really is going to be exciting to see how that does affect the healthcare space.
Yeah, so Sarah, talk through how COVID is affecting consumers. I mean, you spend a lot of time with consumerization of healthcare as you sell. I know you sell B2B solutions, but you think about how consumers are interacting. What's been the impact of COVID on sort of that trend?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. I think it's heightened and put a point on some pent up demand that existed prior to COVID for many years. Even prior to COVID, we saw that 70% of consumers preferred digital to in person when it came to their healthcare, which is a staggering figure. And yet, if you looked at the experience prior to COVID, most of it was still in person, or in my view, quite antiquated and not digitally enabled. For example, having to manually call in to talk to a nurse to be triaged, quote unquote, to the right point of care. Now during COVID, I think, as I mentioned, the toothpaste is out of the tube, to echo some of these health system executives that I speak with. And consumer demand is certainly a very, very real and big pull in the direction of adoption of these digital tools. I'll say it's not the only thing, though, that I think is accelerating this transformation. Certainly it's a huge component, but it would not be possible if it did not make sense monetarily for the other stakeholders in the ecosystem. So definitely reimbursement changes are a big factor in digital transformation, and also buyer demand, right? We think about the providers as being providers of our healthcare, but they're also the buyers. And if this did not monetarily make sense, then I don't know that we would have seen the digital transformation that's happening despite the great amounts of consumer pull. So all this just to say, consumers are a super big stakeholder, and I think they're going to continue to demand and want things digitally online. And certainly that makes sense in this time. But given these other two factors, I do think this is going to be a trend that continues and persists. And that actually leads to a whole trove of opportunities that I get extremely excited about. I'd say in general, even when we're looking at other sectors, for example, my past life, I was a founder of B2B technologies and head of product and spent some time at Google in traditional tech. What you see there is an unbundling of monolithic services that generally happens over time. I predict we're going to see the same sort of evolution in healthcare, going from full stack monolithic players to more of a digital tech stack. And what I mean by that is there's an opportunity for many players to compete and to play in all these little slices that might comprise a digital tech stack, and partially driven by consumerization of healthcare and making improvements to each of those different components. But also partially, I think this is history. We see this in all other industries. There are some more hurdles for certain in this healthcare landscape. I'm sure we're all aware of. It's a bit harder. I think it's the hardest enterprise sale that exists in B2B. But I do think there's a ton of opportunity for players at each of these different levels. To give you an example, it's not just about patient intake anymore. It also is about digital triage, as I've mentioned. There's room for entire companies to be built around online provider directories, digital waiting rooms. I mean, these things are kind of astounding if you think about even just 5-10 years ago, entire companies being built around patient intake or provider directories. It seems pretty incredible. And yet I do think that the time is now in terms of connected systems of healthcare as opposed to monolithic uni organizations monopolizing the different areas of tech, which is all enabled by this quote unquote digital transformation that's underway.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I think it also kind of brings us full circle, really, right? That gets back to interoperability and transparency. And, none of us would stand for, my cell phone not being able to communicate with your cell phone. Like,
oh, yes.
we would think that's ridiculous. And yet health systems, my personal health data is locked up in some health systems and I can't get it out to others. And we need to stop standing for that. So I think the five of us could talk about this for hours. It's our calling to dig into this. I want to have everyone kind of close with 1 or 2 minutes kind of summary of what they see as like what's going to come in the next 12 months. What are you looking for? What do you want founders to send you deals around? And so Mirage, let's start with you, and then we'll kind of go to Desney and Sarah and with Lou.
Yeah, thanks, Vic. This is a great panel. Thanks to all my fellow panelists. Yeah, for me, I'll go even further than 12 months. I think the one thing that was already happening before COVID hit, and I think a few of my panelists have said, this is just a catalyzing event that's going to push it even forward, is the push towards value-based care. And I think that was already happening, and Medicare had already taken a pretty big stand on trying to push even more of that. Some of that was pushed back with some roadblocks, but I think that overall, that's the only way that seems to make sense to really take care of a patient, because instead of just worrying about them for a year or maybe 2 years, actually worrying about them for longer term. And so I think that that's what I'm really excited about seeing, is I think that COVID, I don't know how, and I don't know exactly how quickly it's going to push it forward, but I'm excited to see that transformation happen sooner. I'm pretty certain that that's going to happen quicker than, the traditional path that we were kind of going down of maybe 5 to 10 years. Hopefully within 5 years, we go even more towards that. And then for, on the side of looking forward to working with startup companies, yeah, I think it really is, the angle that I try to look at it is, anytime that that a company is doing something interesting that allows them to help the overall patient outcome. And that could be even just a tool that helps the provider do their job better, that then in turn makes the patient be healthier, help them be a healthier self is what I'm interested in, especially when they're starting to do something interesting with data. And so this could be, you know, any of these wearables that provide better data streams for the patient, or just pure software plays like digital therapeutics is a term that's been thrown out. And so yeah, looking forward to working with any startup companies that are trying to disrupt healthcare in that way.
Excellent. So Desiree, talk about your same question to you. Close us with where you see it going and what you're looking for.
Yeah, it's fun. And the reason I think I'm able to wear, you know, my multiple hats at Microsoft, at IntuitiveX, at the University of Washington, is that it all converges at a single point and brings my life together. You know, I think we're in dire times, but as with all dire times, the opportunities are large. For me, it sort of converges at data and this notion of precision health, you know, again, personalized data-centric healthcare. You know, I think that the opportunities, you know, as we see the regulatory landscape change, as we see, you know, the commercial landscape change, payers, providers, pharma, biotech, are quite large in this space. What I personally look for in investing and in engaging across the landscape are groups and enterprises that are looking systemically and deeply at the transformations that are happening. So I think there's a lot of sort of point innovation that's happening, and I think we have to continue to fuel that, and that's important. But personally, I look for sort of the step functions, if you will, the large leaps that we're likely to make as a function of opportunity and circumstance. You know, I'll just close by saying, you know, and multiple of my fellow panelists have pointed this out in multiple different ways, but healthcare is a complex beast. You know, the motivations, the economics, the processes, the dynamics. And so recognizing that it's unlikely, and Sarah just mentioned this as well, that any one enterprise or any small set of enterprises is going to be able to make that transformational change. So it will take a village, it will take all of us. It will take all of us working together in some fashion, and perhaps as a call to arms, but both to entrepreneurs, you know, small and large enterprises. That this is a critical time. It is a critical set of problems. It is a critical set of opportunities, and we all need to come together in some fashion to solve it in our respective ways.
Excellent. I think we all agree with that. Sarah, give us your perspective. Same thing.
Sure. In terms of what we are looking for and what we get excited by, as I mentioned, it's particularly this opportunity that it resides at the intersection of data and health. But when we're looking for founders to back, say at the seed or Series A stage, I just want to highlight two things that we find incredibly critical for our investing decisions, because we think that these are the components that are necessary to build a long-term sustainable business in the space. So one is the tech, and we do look for AI-driven companies that are taking advantage of these great troves of data, or possibly creating new troves of data as well. So embedded within that, it's modern software architecture that scales. And then just given the space that we play in, you know, also remember the constraints around HIPAA, GDPR, FDA, MDR, you know, all these different acronyms that just pose different barriers. And so we look for our technical founders to be incredibly thoughtful around those specific technical constraints and also scaffolding to build companies at scale. And then the second piece that's particularly important to us, we desire to back founders who understand the market dynamics, because this is incredibly complex. Whereas maybe in other areas of enterprise tech, you could get founders with incredible tech and not so much market knowledge and still have those companies succeed. Here, particularly given these dynamics where it's important for your tech to play well with others in the ecosystem, we particularly look for founders who have this sort of either market experience directly or are surrounded by advisors and people to help inform the direction of the company. Otherwise, you could have the best technology in the world. And unfortunately, as I'm sure we've seen, that's just not enough to succeed in this space. So we continue to look for founders that bring those two things to the table, and are looking forward to backing many founders who will go on to build transformative businesses, especially in healthcare.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, and so Lou, you get the last word. So summarize the whole thing. Do the whole panel summary for us. It's all on you.
Yeah, sure, happy to. And first, I also still want to share what we're looking for, and also interesting opportunity we're identifying the next couple of years. Definitely, as I mentioned, mental health is one of the major focus for us. Mental well-being, mental health, mental disease diagnostic, leverage new tech. It's a very interesting area. And as I said, it's the first time we were able to find very good personalized correlation, leverage the data, leverage the network technology, leverage the AI. And meanwhile, another thing is specifically regarding data. Many of us talk about the importance of the data, and also we have so many different sources of data. But another big challenge is the isolation of the data. So healthcare, different institutes in the healthcare system have their data set, but not necessarily have the best channel to connect them together, to integrate all the data together to provide a better, no matter diagnostic or healthcare service result. So if any technology or any company are working on potential solution to solve that problem, plus another better solution for the data privacy protection, that'll be something we're very interested to look at. I think this is a great panel. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think all of us share lots of align very well in terms of the trend and also the sector we're looking at, and also the potential opportunity. I think it's a great time, and also great industry trend right now for no matter founder and investor to invest capital and the resources into this direction. And the one last thing I really want to highlight before the close is because of my background, I really want to encourage all the investor and the founder not to be afraid of the hardware. I know that when we talk about digital transformation or digital solution, most of people think about purely software solution. But hardware software integration is critical, because if we want to control the data, the entrance of the data is a hardware layer. Even you're only providing a software solution, your customer may have a hardware infrastructure you need to integrate with. So really understand the hardware software integration would definitely provide a better solution, and also give a founder opportunity to build a much stronger technology differentiation.
Yeah, I agree. So, I think maybe, as he said, I'm not sure, in dire times, it becomes more important to really step up to the opportunity. And I think for us as investors, we can have an incredible impact helping founders really sort of capture this opportunity and make a difference for people. And then Lou, I agree exactly with what you're saying, that particularly in healthcare, eventually you have to interface with the human, interface with the person, whether that's through a drug or a device or a procedure or a doctor or a interaction, a digital therapy. And so often that would be a hardware and software combination eventually. So anyway, I really want to thank the whole panel. This has been really fun. We sort of experimented with a new format that I think worked out pretty well, and hopefully the audience enjoyed it. We don't have any questions because we're virtual, so we can drop the mic and head home. Thanks everyone for doing it. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us. It was fun.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Vic. Take care.